for us, with kind of all of the advancements in automation and AI over the recent years, it's obviously it's become increasingly more complicated to know how to do good PPC, and it's so much more dependent on case by case basis now than it was previously, where, for example, granularity was a lot more applicable in most cases, whereas now it's a lot more dependent on the context of the client, the type of kind of conversion data that you get, the audiences, the type of users that react to your ads, etc. So in order to, again, formulate that approach to search excellence, it was important for us to take a step back, kind of identify what the core areas of search excellence are, and then make sure we define what we see as the ideal within each area. So just to give you a bit of a context in terms of kind of the different areas. Essentially, we took kind of the core aspects of paid search as a whole, looking into things like performance max and shopping, obviously the search campaigns and bidding side of things, brand PPC as its own separate thing, because through experimentation, we found that tends to perform differently. It tends to respond to value-based bidding strategies, for example, very differently. Then we looked into audiences, looked into conversion data, and then lastly tied it all up with testing and optimization. So essentially, while, after we've identified all of these core areas and identified what an ideal performance max strategy would be in a retailer case or a lead gen case, then we took kind of this approach and looked at all of our individual clients and produced a health check that scores each individual client across all of these areas. And then ultimately that allowed us to have a clearer grasp into how our accounts are performing, where the opportunities are, but essentially the score isn't to go off and tell someone you're not doing a good enough job, do better. The main point was, okay, we have accounts that are in green, they're clearly able to reach the ideal and are reaching that ideal, so that's fantastic. There are accounts that are achieving less than that, and that opens up an opportunity for dialogue. It just allows us to kind of get further information, get deeper context into the individual circumstances of that client to be able to understand it better and potentially try and overcome some of those challenges. So that's kind of the backdrop of what our approach to search excellence is. But it'd be interesting to know from a Google point of view, how does that match up with what you guys see as search excellence?
Quite interesting of a approach that you're seeing. I think when we start to look at a certain account, few things that you are currently looking at is what is the hygiene factors of it, what are the basic building blocks that are enabling the success of a campaign, and what are the measurement aspects to ensure that we are delivering or getting the best out of what we are putting into the account, right? And I think all that you have kind of encompassed in the tracker that you have does cover all those aspects of it. And I really like the approach where we are kind of considering what the best in class looks like and how far behind where we are, and trying to bridge those gaps along the journey, which will enable us to kind of focus our times and efforts into areas where we need the highest priority in terms of our time utilization, ensuring that we are moving in the right direction, because time is the most crucial resource for any one of us, right? And I really love the approach that we are kind of taking with figuring out those key pockets without relying too heavily on manual inputs, because if you see accounts come in different shapes or sizes, right? And some accounts will have hundreds of campaigns, which means hundreds of hours might be involved in just scrubbing through and understanding the architecture and then correlating this data back manually. And the way you have kind of broken down a subjective metric into an objective metric, I think is a positive sign of how we would want the account structure to look like and how you are kind of correlating it back from your agency as a practice and taking it forward.
Yeah. And I love that you're taking the approach of collaboration instead of looking at different areas of search excellence towards silos. So I would love if you could just tell me a little bit more about the components to have the score there for all the areas that you see as search excellence in Journey Further.
So essentially, within each of those components on the screen there are subcomponents, so key questions that we would like to I guess, ask or look into in a bit more detail to understand how an individual account would score against that metric. So one of the areas that I particularly focused on was search structure and bidding. So there, what we looked at is how do we approach search structure, and then kept the bidding side of it quite simple, because bidding is quite subjective. We didn't want to penalize accounts or analysts, if you will, based on whether they use target ROAS or whether they use target CPA. Obviously, according to Google's hierarchy, target CPA is below, but in individual cases, target CPA might be the best way to go. And even though target ROAS might be an option, it might not be necessarily the best solution for that particular client. So in that regard, the bidding side of it was kept a bit more simple. We wanted to differentiate between manual, which within obviously that bit of the health score, this excludes the brand side of things, which is where we normally see better results through manual bidding or enhanced CPC, if you will. With the other aspect of the search structure, that only looks at non-brand. So here, we know that manual bidding doesn't perform as well. So, if an account is on manual bidding, that wouldn't necessarily be a point in favor. There might be good enough reasons as to why you would do that, but in most cases, it's not the ideal that we're trying to achieve. But alongside that, we looked at things like consolidation, what we spoke about earlier with your presentation. Are keywords divided according to match types? Is there unnecessary segmentation between campaigns, between ad groups? Or are they consolidated? Are we providing smart bidding with the right information and with as much information as possible through a single point? So all of these kind of areas within search excellence that we've identified as kind of core aspects of it, they all have different sub-questions within them, which then allows us to kind of identify what client is achieving those ideals and what client isn't. What we haven't done yet, which would be interesting to see your ideas on, is we haven't weighed the different aspects differently. So we consider them as equal. We consider, let's say, 100% score on Performance Max and 100% score on audiences as equally important. And there's an argument to be made in favor of that, and there's an argument to be made against that. But from you guys' point of view, should there be a differentiation, or is that more of a case-by-case basis and it shouldn't be factored into an objective health check?
For me, all the building blocks are equally important because they enable the success of a campaign or an account in their own respect. I will have a PMAX campaign running, great, but if the audiences that are feeding into that PMAX are not that great, or the assets that are being utilized in that PMAX are not that great, my PMAX will underperform. Likewise, if I have a great audience, but I am using, say, a campaign that only focuses on remarketing, where in a current ecosystem, remarketing is kind of going down because of cookieless future kicking into being. Is that the best strategy? Maybe it is, maybe it is not. So I think that subjectivity kicks in, but all those components that are the basic building block of each channel are quite important and quintessentially equally important in all aspects, right? You touched upon, say, target CPA versus target ROAS versus manual bidding, right? I think it's a flavor of what the campaign and the industry is kind of presenting, what we are trying to achieve. There's no hard truth of T-ROAS being better than TCPA or vice versa. It's more about where you are in your digital maturity, what kind of a data you are kind of passing back into the account, and what level of data we can leverage. The higher the level of data that's available for us to kind of mine and leverage on the account, the better the levers or the building blocks are, which essentially leads into a better performance, right? So I'll not kind of gravitate towards 100% PMAX in terms of hygiene correlates back to amazingly great performance. But I would say that 100% is definitely better than 60% of hygiene of a PMAX campaign. So a PMAX campaign that's much more designed to encompass everything will yield somewhat better results than something that's missing out on a few gaps.
Yeah, I mean, with the percentages that we do have there, so we touched on, it's basically based on initial questions, and as you touched on there about data maturity.
Yep.
So the PMAX score there will be based on have they used insights, and then that will be another score. So when you're looking at 100% there, that would be have they ticked every box in a position of like 4 different questions to an ideal situation. So with testing, we have there, so you'd get a point if you're running a test, and then you get a point if you're completed a test, and then it'd be another point if you've completed plus 2 tests. So then that would then add up to the 100% you'd see. So it does keep it quite nice and pillared across the way. So there is the weighting kind of works with that. And I think what we are trying to do with the experimentation and the testing side of things is have that across all areas. So if we are seeing, say, a red score in, say, audiences or ad copy, then we give people the opportunity to add a test to that area to then bring up the score, even if it might not be a relevant thing for their account or their campaigns and things. We at least know that that's either been tested, the test didn't work, or there's definitely something, they're looking into it, and that's an idea that then sparks up new tests, and then we're bringing those tests together, that then we can then analyse across accounts and then cross-examination across the department. I think it's something that we have been missing for quite some time, is that centralisation. You touched on it about being siloed, and it's quite easy to come in, look after your account, and then kind of disregard everyone else's accounts. But what we're trying to do as an agency is bring everyone together, and then that sort of stands us apart from other agencies. We become like a core, and we know what works, and people aren't making the same mistakes. They have to sort of build on that.
And I would love to also understand from you guys, like, in a given PMAX ecosystem or a shopping or a retail client, right? There's categories that come into being, and then categorization plays a huge role of how that structure kind of comes into play. How does that translate back into our current ecosystem? And how do we capture that either we are covering all the products or the inventory that's there? And then how does it also translate back to the right category is getting the right bidding and the goals for it, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, the scoring systems have been set up by individuals sort of within the team. We represent sort of 2 parts of this, but the performance max side of things, again, will be based on the criteria. Has the asset group's been set up correctly? Are they split up? Has it been assigned to say that value, like a higher value in one asset group or lower value? Is there more thought? Basically, is there more thought been gone into it than just pressing play? Has audience insights been set up correctly? All these things will add an additional point onto a score, and if it needs, then looking back, if it's an orange or a red, that elements have been missed based on an initially there was a survey that went out, and that someone went through each performance max account and then based it across that criteria that then gave us that original sort of score. But then, yeah, obviously we have a list in the back end that then, which is ever sort of evolving to then produce these scores. But yeah, we'd be really helpful to see if the qualifying questions that we have would align to the sort of things that you would see. But yeah, that would be really interesting to see.
So yeah, one thing to add to that is a lot of the, I guess, initial pillars of each of these core areas of search excellence have been based on a blend of Google's own best practice plus our own experimentation data. So in terms of whether we're missing something, we're definitely not missing anything. Is there something we could add? Definitely. Something a bit more innovative. So when it comes to Performance Max specifically, as that's what we've been discussing, we look at things like are there different Performance Max campaigns based on profit margins if profit margin data is available, because we know that's the kind of best way to structure it. However, if it's not available, it's not necessarily fair to penalize someone for it.
Correct.
So we take a bit more basic approach, if you will, and then look at a Performance Max campaign as a whole, and then whether there are different asset groups within it for different product categories. Because again, we know that's the best way to structure that particular campaign. Do the assets match up? Are they rated as excellent? Because if we're honest, it's not that difficult to get assets rated as excellent. So if they're not, you're not using either good quality assets or you're just using the wrong assets. So that conversation needs to be had there, and at least the way I see it is that as a very subjective, objective score. If they're excellent, most of the time they will be excellent, because it's really not that difficult to achieve that score. So it should be part of the kind of factors that go into that score. But then, as Nick said, we also have the aspect of our audience insights applied. What type of audience insights? Are they the right ones? Are they not? And then alongside that, we have some more, I guess, innovative approach that we've tested internally. So one of the case studies that I went through earlier is dormant products. So what these products are is products which haven't gotten any clicks within the last 30 days. And with most of the accounts, we see a percentage of dormant products, but with some accounts like that one in particular, it was the majority of the products that were not getting any clicks at all. So that's a strategy that we, as a rule, apply across all of our accounts, because there's two ways it can go. It will either bring about results like that, where you get significant uplifts in revenue and you show more of your product range, or it's not going to do too much, but you are going to get additional traffic and you are going to get additional revenue anyway. So there's no actual downside to applying that strategy. So that also went into the score. So that's how a lot of those pillars are structured. It is, the baseline is Google's best practice.
Perfect.
And the only kind of circumstances in which Google's best practice isn't at the forefront is when we know through years and years of testing that we found a better way to do it. So brand PPC, at the moment, a lot of kind of the Google representatives I speak to don't really recommend target ROAS for brand PPC, but that wasn't the case up until very recently. So for us, it was always, manual or enhanced CPC works better for brand.
But why not target impression share?
Sorry?
But why not target impression share? Because you would naturally capture that audience by your organic side of things. So it's more about opportunity loss of not losing that space to a competitor. In case of enhanced CPC, you would be focusing on.
So that's a very interesting point. And we have also tested this extensively. So what we have tested, as you said, target impression share versus enhanced CPC. And we find that with target impression share, the costs are still inflated, even though the impression share achieved through both bidding strategies is the same. So usually we find that when we apply enhanced CPC, we never limit the bids. So we set them high enough that we'll always appear first in the auctions. So the point isn't to kind of signal to the machine learning, you can only spend 2p per click and that's it, I won't pay anymore. We will give it room, we will give it up to 15, 20, 30p. I have an account that has enhanced CPC for brand set to £1.50. It's never going to spend that. But I want to know that if a competitor comes really aggressively in my space over a weekend when I potentially might not be as on it as I normally would be, we will still appear first, and then we can address that moving forward.
But you can put a CPC bid limit on a target impression share as well.
So that's another thing that we should be testing a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we have this testing framework in place, because we have a hypothesis and we test it on account by account, and we find that sometimes it works great, and the algorithms do their work. But I think on more accounts in our agency than you've seen, we use brand manual, and we have success, and we don't have to. It just seems to work for us, kind of thing.
And I think where you are now, it's testing and finding ways to deliver the best solutions for customers. I would even go further and say about something that we have been discussing here towards brand, about brand control, where you have broad match, but you have the control to add queries that you don't want to be seen towards in the campaign. So this is something that we've been discussing here at Google. It's launched, you have in the accounts. So this is something that if you want to go a step further, we can have conversation on that, because we're in the early stages of, understanding, using AI to get more reach towards something at a smaller cost per click.
I think brand is something that we're seeing clients talk about more and more in terms of, is that spend, is it something that I know they're working with organic teams, and often as a PPC team, they'll have their own SEO team. So there's quite a lot of friction sometimes between those, and they're saying, if you turn brand campaigns off, we could get that revenue. So that seems to be a constant sort of, we have to kind of always sort of answer those questions. And we found in the tests we have done, when we have turned off brand campaigns, there's been a massive loss of revenue. but that conversation with clients, I feel, just is ever evolving. I feel like that's a real pressure point at the moment for clients with that kind of thing.
I second that. I think the industry is moving into an ecosystem where we're fine-tuning the balance between a long-tail search versus a branded search. And it's going to be different for each and every brand, because every brand has their own push and pull strategy that they're kind of doing, along with the maturity of that industry. Right? So if it's a high ticket item where I'm investing a lot of time and effort, I might gravitate very highly towards a brand, because I know the brand brings some trust and value and the experience that they have in place. Whereas if it's a low ticket item, I might not be that bothered about brand, and I'm more specific in the query that I bring into being. So it kind of varies from industry to industry, product to product, and solution to solution. So I'll not say that's a one ticket fit all kind of a vanilla solution that kind of presents itself. It's more about, as you guys know, and you work with a lot of accounts as well, it's the journey that you go through on that account and figure out what is the right balance for each, rather than it being that it has to be 20% brand, 80% efficiency, or vice versa. So it kind of varies along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I work with the highly competitive sort of windows and doors, and what we see often when they're on TV is you get local suppliers then piling on their brand terms, because they know that's an easy win when people are on the TV. So we see, although TV revenue comes in, we also see a spike in brand. So it's a really hard sort of balance between those kind of areas as well.
Correct. And the challenge sometimes in these kind of activities is finding the right balance of what was actually a measurable impact. You have studies like brand lift studies, you have search lift studies that are there. That's okay, but when you're looking at branding as an activity, it is not just search, it's say YouTube as an activity, discovery as an activity, display as an activity, and it may not yield the result today. It might yield a result in the next 1 month, might be in the next 2 months or 3 months, because depending on the market and the industry and where you are kind of thriving in, it will change. So it's not that easy to figure out the right balance and convincing the clients that, hey, we need to be spending this much on branding activities, be it search, be it other channels that are there, and why we need to kind of showcase that as well.
Exactly, and I think you put it perfectly. That is half the battle, just trying to convince the client to do what you know is the right approach. But that's where the testing map that we have, testing board that we have in place really helps, because we can go to clients with actual results from other businesses within a similar or the same industry, and tell them, look, you might not want to invest in YouTube because it's expensive, it might not yield results immediately, but we have these 10 case studies that we've done in similar sized brands within a similar industry that, yes, didn't see the results immediately because that's just the type of product that it is, but they saw an uplift in brand volume, they saw an uplift in shopping click-through rate, they saw an uplift in brand awareness. So a lot of these insights, half of it is for that kind of health check / hygiene type of aspect of it, and then the other half is to just have that data there, to not always have to rely on your own client's data, because I don't have to test the same thing over and over again to be able to come to a conclusion. I can look at 20 different tests that have been done and then decide if that test is the right thing for me or not. And obviously I'm not advocating for, it works for Nick, so it's going to work for me. It might not. But if it worked for Nick and 7 other people, it's definitely worth a shot, and I have a much better chance explaining that to the client and convincing the client to give it a go if I can bring about positive results. And I think that's where our collaboration with Google comes in really handy, where you can ask for specific insights and get kind of industry benchmarking or even anonymized competitor insights. All of that is really, really helpful to be able to kind of steer the client in the right direction.